Violent juvenile crime is on the rise. That's according to the Lubbock County Juvenile Justice Center. As we've reported, Lubbock police are now looking at ways to curb the crime rate, which could include an enhanced curfew.
KCBD News Channel 11's investigative reporter Shaylee Sanders tells us how prosecutors are handling the rise in cases and some of the challenges they face.
Call 911.
A Lubbock police officer.
Did he hit you with a car?
Knocked to the ground.
He got it. There's your gun, officer. Man, these guys hit this officer.
The most tenured member of our police department, Larry Barnhill, a 47-year veteran of the Lubbock Police Department, was almost ran over and killed by a 14-year-old driving a stolen vehicle.
And Lubbock Police Chief Floyd Mitchell says this was no accident.
This 14-year-old, without hesitation, turned the wheel and drove that vehicle right at Larry. He hadn't been 2 steps out of his vehicle and could have killed him.
The director of the Juvenile Justice Center, William Carter, tells us the number of juvenile cases presented to the district attorney's office is up 30% from this time last year. And there's a 33% increase in felonies. The majority of those, he says, are violent. Carter says statewide, 66 juveniles were referred for homicide in 2019. By 2021, that number climbed to 133. So far in the state of Texas, 146 juveniles have been referred for homicide. Lubbock County District Attorney Sunshine Stanek says her office works to make certain the punishment fits the crime.
We talk about certifying a juvenile as an adult and treating them as an adult in the criminal justice system. And that is an extremely important tool that we have, but it's also a very difficult tool for us to utilize because of the restrictions that we are placed under by the legislature.
Jenny Simpson is the chief of the juvenile division for the district attorney's office and says the punishment for juveniles isn't based on the offense alone.
So you could see, a terrible, heinous crime and think, oh yeah, that's for sure someone who could be certified, but that's not necessarily true.
So what do prosecutors need for adult certification?
I'd have to file a petition with the court and let the juvenile as well as his parents know, as well as the court know my intention is to attempt to certify this person. I would have to have the judge order a diagnostic evaluation, which is done by, either a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and they're looking at things like criminal thinking, family situation, past history.
Ultimately, prosecutors say it's up to the court.
Our office has looked at certifying a number of juveniles in the recent year or two, and we have had very few occasions where we have the evidence to present to a court that would allow for that certification, unfortunately. But we will continue to look at certifying the juveniles that we believe need to be treated as adults.
Shaylee Sanders, KCBD, investigates.
This is KCBD News Channel 11 at 10.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us.
The Texas Juvenile Justice Department is in turmoil. That's according to the latest report on the agency. Tomorrow, final recommendations will be made to the legislature on how best to address the problems at state juvenile facilities.
KCBD investigative reporter Shaylee Sanders joins us now to explain the issues and how those problems put a strain on county resources. Shaylee?
Karen and Abner, a Texas Juvenile Justice Department secure facility is the most serious place a juvenile offender can go. And right now, there is a wait list to get in. That means violent juvenile offenders are sitting at county detention centers like the one here in Lubbock until they can be transferred. And in this latest report, it shows that prolonged intake backlogs are just one of the many problems at TJJD that need to be fixed.
There's 115 total kids across the state waiting to go to TJJD.
And Chief Juvenile Probation Officer William Carter says 7 of them are sitting in the Lubbock County Juvenile Justice Center. 5 are Lubbock County residents. 2 were transferred here.
The 5 that we have committed to TJJD right now, 4 of them were death-related offenses. One of the out of county is a death-related offense, and one is a very heinous sex offense.
Juvenile violent crime is up statewide.
Ag robberies, engage in organized criminal activity, manslaughters, obstruction, unlawfully carrying weapon, capital murder. It's very, very serious offenses.
Take a look at these homicide referrals for the state of Texas. In fiscal year 2019, there were 66. So far this year, 152. According to the Sunset Report, aggravated robberies and assaults rose by 80% in that same time frame. Juveniles found guilty of these crimes are sitting in county detention centers across the state, including the one in Lubbock, waiting months to be transferred to the state's secure facilities.
Currently, as far as kids that are pending, the longest wait time is over 120 days. It was at a high of 168 whenever it was at the peak.
Carter says the Texas Juvenile Justice Department currently takes 8 to 12 juveniles a week. The reason for the intake backlog? Critical staff shortages. According to the Sunset Report, TJJD turnover rates are the worst among large state agencies, with a 71% turnover rate reported in fiscal year 2021. About 30% of officers hired in fiscal year 2022 left the agency within their first month of employment. TJJD issued lockdowns, leaving juveniles isolated in their cells for the majority of the day because they didn't have enough staff to monitor them. Some juveniles admitted to hurting themselves just so they could leave their cells to use the restroom after waiting more than 3 hours. Sunset staff believes the lockdowns are partly to blame for the increase in aggressive and suicidal behaviors reported by TJJD. From fiscal years 2019 to 2021, the agency reported almost 10,000 assaults on youth and staff at its secure facilities. It also reported more than 6,500 suicide alerts in 2021. That's a 40% increase since 2019. This report says staff was so busy with suicidal risk assessments, routine programming, including counseling, had to be canceled. Carter says he's short on staff at the county level too, but juveniles still have access to those critical resources.
Since we're able to get the kids out and program on a daily basis, that helps their mental psyche itself, because at TJJD, if the kids are locked down in their cells for 20 some odd hours a day, that would tear on me too.
In fiscal year 2021, the Lubbock County Juvenile Justice Center reported a turnover rate of 44%. Right now, the center has 11 officer vacancies, which is preventing them from using 12 beds.
We are seeing them leave within just a couple of weeks of starting hire here. They just realize that the severity of the kids we have back here is not their cup of tea, and they move on to something else.
As county detention centers deal with their own staffing struggles, the issues at the state level have leaders rethinking where to send adjudicated youth.
They're just lost confidence in some of the treatment that can be provided at TJJD.
Carter says the state has made improvements, but there will likely be more to come. The Sunset Commission will issue its final recommendations to the legislature tomorrow. We'll let you know what changes are suggested and how state leaders respond. Karen and Abner.
State lawmakers are in agreement. Changes must be made to the Texas Juvenile Justice Department. This is an update to the investigative report we brought you last night.
Today, Sunset commissioners with the legislature approved recommendations to the agency in turmoil. KCBD investigative reporter Shaylee Sanders listened in on the hearing. Shaylee?
Karen and Abner, 13 pages of recommendations to address key issues in the Texas Juvenile Justice Department and its facilities across the state. There will be changes in funding, oversight, policies, and more. And while lawmakers say these changes are a step in the right direction, they agree that more needs to be done. The Texas Juvenile Justice Department was born out of scandal, and a decade later, it still struggles to avoid the spotlight. That's how this Sunset Report on the TJJD begins. Sunset staff reported the agency has a 71% turnover rate among juvenile correctional officers. And despite a recent pay raise, some, like Senator Nathan Johnson, believe another increase would help.
We're still probably $6,000 or $7,000, which is around 18% under a market rate for a juvenile justice corrections officer. And the long-term viability of this agency, I think, is in jeopardy.
This report found the critical staffing levels put both youth and employees in danger. According to data from the State Office of Risk Management, TJJD has had the highest injury frequency rate among all reporting entities over the last decade. Today's approved recommendations will require TJJD to work with that office to develop strategies to address and minimize employee injuries. Still, Senator Charles Perry says the juvenile justice system may not be equipped to handle some juvenile offenders.
We may not have the facility or the path to deal with that child today, and we may have to get very creative on how we take the extremes from the system to handle the kids that have just made really poor decisions. But there are some hardened kids that we must look at in the eye and say, where do we go from here? And today, I don't think we've truly addressed that.
Sunset staff found lockdowns likely contributed to a 35% increase in suicide assessments and a 19% increase in aggressive behaviors during the fall of 2021. TJJD forced juveniles to spend the majority of their day in isolation because they didn't have enough staff to monitor them. This probe discovered one juvenile tied a ligature around his neck to ensure staff performing routine door checks would pull him out of isolation before he was critically injured. Today, the commissioners agreed that the legislature should consider appropriating additional funding to TJJD to build 2 new state-secure facilities, with the opportunity for either or both to specialize in specific treatment like crisis stabilization and mental health care. TJJD's interim director, Chandra Carter, declined an interview, but sent us a statement that reads in part, "We are grateful for the Commission's support for funding 2 smaller state facilities in urban areas." Carter agreed with the Commission's key recommendations and said while it will take some time to implement them, the agency is already at work developing those plans. We'll continue our investigative coverage on TJJD and its impact on county facilities tomorrow at 6. Karen and Abner.
6.
The kids are complex and more dangerous than ever before, and that's getting worse and probably will continue.
Lubbock State Senator Charles Perry says the juvenile justice system is not equipped to handle today's violent offenders. Good evening, and thank you for joining us.
This is a follow-up to our investigative reporting on the Texas Juvenile Justice Department, and now the agency is working to develop plans to address key issues that put public safety at risk.
KCBD investigative reporter Shaylee Sanders sat down with Senator Perry to talk about solutions already in the works and what still needs to be done.
We kind of have a system that mirrors the Leave It to Beaver era, the good family dynamic with kids that just make bad decisions.
But State Senator Charles Perry says many of today's juvenile offenders are more complex with serious violent offenses.
These are 14-year-olds committing capital murder charges. We have not updated our systems in so many levels, be it the juvenile justice system, be it the public school discipline system.
Perry, a member of the legislature's Sunset Advisory Commission, made a recommendation to require the Texas Juvenile Justice Department to adopt rules authorizing county facilities to separate youth as they await transfer to the state's secure facilities.
Right now, the post-adjudication kid, the kid that's been tried and convicted, is mixed back in with the pre-adjudication kids. Plus just the danger. Those kids have crossed over and killed somebody on that end and been convicted of that. Do you really want them to be with the kid that was a small degree felony burglary? It gives the option to separate those kids pre, post, and during adjudication.
According to the Sunset staff report, some youth found guilty of violent crimes were released because county facilities ran out of beds, waiting for TJJD to transfer them.
Public safety is the #1 issue when we have a juvenile justice system. It's a hope that we would have rehab. It's a hope that we would mitigate recidivism. It's a hope that we would short-circuit the path that those kids are on. And I think we have an obligation to try. But #1 is public safety.
And one way to do this, Perry says, is to adjust salaries to get competitive in the market.
There are people that are called for this job, but they have to be safe and they also have to make a living doing it. So we've got to recognize that.
So adopted.
The Sunset Advisory Commission has approved these recommendations and more. Now they will be presented to the legislature in a bill, and lawmakers will make the final decision. Shaylee Sanders, KCBD, News Channel 11.